This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com, where today it is finally NFL Week number 1. We're going to break down the lines for Week 1 with Dr. Eric Eager of Pro Football Focus, get his thoughts on his favorite bets for this week, and talk a little bit of college football as well. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Dr. Ed Feng. You can find his work over at thepowerrank.com. And Ed, one of the games we're going to discuss with Eric is Bucks Cowboys. I, an idiot, bet Cowboys plus 6.5 before the Dak Prescott injury, before the Zach Martin injury. Every move makes me feel like an idiot. So I'm feeling great. How are you?
Wow, I'm good. I was surprised. I was looking at your rundown before we jumped on the show to record, and yeah, all of a sudden, Tampa Bay's 8.5. My numbers think that's too much. I think that's too much. I think you have a 43-year-old quarterback. Defensive regression is probably one of the most certain things in the NFL, despite the fact that I really do love the talent on that side of the ball for Tampa Bay. So yeah, no, it was a pleasant surprise this morning. I haven't done anything about it yet, but I think I will after we finish recording here.
I'm very conflicted because I already have. So I had 6.5 from when we were in Illinois for a wedding reception. And then the Dak injury happened and it moved to 7.5. And I was in Colorado and I was like, this seems like the sentiment's pretty good. Do I add more at 7.5 or do I stand pat? I was very itchy, so I added it at 7.5, and at 8.5, I'm like, oh man, I don't know. Like, do I keep digging this hole deeper? But obviously it's not a good feeling to see that number move the wrong way. We'll see how things play out Thursday. And we'll get a full breakdown of that game as well from Dr. Eric Eager.
And I think for an opening Thursday night NFL game, it's good to have just even a little bit on one of the two sides, right? Obviously, we've
more than a little bit at this point, which is upsetting.
Oh well, but let's say you didn't have an opinion. You know, like this was sitting at 7.5. I don't know, for the last couple of days, and I just updated my numbers on my site, and it says Tampa Bay by 7.4. And so, but now it's moved, and so now you get a little extra excitement for what I think whenever you open up the NFL season, there's a ton of excitement. I'm certainly excited about it. It's going to be fantastic. But I like the markets that have opened up a little opportunity for me.
Yeah, I spent my morning Twitter searching Zach Martin negative, trying to see if he had gotten a negative test yesterday. Couldn't find an answer. Pretty sad about it, but it's going to be a rough start. We're off to a blazing start here for me for week number 1.
Well, yeah. Well, we talk about my college football start pretty soon, so
we will. But we're also going to talk some Clemson, Georgia there. That was a pretty fun game. We're going to recap that in just 1 second. But first, if you want to find Dr. Eric Eager and find all of his work, you can find it at PFF_Eric. He, of course, is one of the co-hosts on the PFF Forecast podcast, their betting podcast with George Charuri. You can find that by going to the numberFire show notes and looking there. There is a link to the PFF Forecast podcast. You can also just search for it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever to get all of that. Before we talk to Dr. Eric Eager, though, we got to go back to last week. You mentioned the Clemson, Georgia game. We got to go back through that and more to recap week number 1 in college football.
Covering the past.
Last week here on Covering the Spread, we had Ben Stevens on to talk week 1 of college football. You can find Ben on the morning after on Sports Grid and also on Twitter at Ben Scott Stevens. He was on Wisconsin minus 5.5 against Penn State, and Penn State's defense came to play for this game. They held Wisconsin to 10 total points. That game was scoreless. It felt like forever. Penn State won that game outright 16-10. So even with Sean Clifford not lighting it up, they did get the job done there. Next up for Ben.
Wait, hold on. Let's talk about that real quick because we talked about the show last week that Sean Clifford has a ceiling, and neither Ben nor I thought it was very high. I did think Graham Mertz had a higher ceiling. I may be adjusting that opinion. I don't think he looked particularly good. The numbers don't suggest that he was good. And yeah, I think Penn State's defense played great, but there might be an adjustment on Wisconsin. So, it's one game. So we will, and I think when you look at last season, yeah, he definitely, was great against Michigan. They looked great. And then he played terribly. And I think part of that was, he had a shoulder injury and he was trying to play through it.
Right.
So that may be true. That may not be true. But we'll see how Wisconsin progresses over the next couple of weeks.
It was not encouraging. I'll say that. I think that's the way I'd phrase it.
Yeah, and they host Michigan in the not too far future. Michigan looked pretty good in their opener too. So we'll get some interesting data points.
I meant to talk to you about Michigan too. They're not in our covering the past, but watching that game, you're like, oh man, Ronnie Bell gonna blow up this year, and like just such a bummer to see the way that game started and to see him specifically. Like injuries always suck, but like the Ronnie Bell one, like that's just like it's just such a bummer to see him specifically get hurt there.
Yes, it was a bummer, especially after that amazing catch that got called back because of a ridiculous offensive pass interference that should have been negated by the defensive pass interference right after it. Yes, it is a bummer. I do feel like Michigan has, that was part of my argument with Michigan, is that they do have more speed and quickness at the skill positions than they ever have in the Harbaugh era. So now we're going to test that. I actually didn't end up betting the Michigan game, but it was interesting to walk it to a watch party in Ann Arbor, and everyone had Western Michigan plus 17.
Wow. I suppose this is probably the first year of legal online betting in Michigan. First year you actually get to go to watch parties because like vaccinations and stuff like that. So like it's a different experience now, I'd assume, being able to have everyone in on the action effectively.
Yeah, we had a good time.
That's awesome. Good for you. I'm excited about that. Not excited about the Ronnie Bell injury, but we'll see what Michigan does going forward. Next up for Ben was Alabama versus Georgia. He had the over there. It closed to 62.
Alabama, Miami?
Alabama versus Miami. Right. I said Georgia. Alabama versus Miami. He had over 61.5. It closed at 62, so it did inch up a bit, but Miami didn't hold up on their end. I'm not sure if De'Ara King is still a little bit hesitant, whatever it may be, but they were down 27-3 at the end of the first half, 41-13 through three quarters. So 2 scores would have gotten over the total, but I think it's a good example, Ed, of where it's tough for me to bet overs in games that are not competitive. And I think that there were reasons to expect Miami's defense to do something. They didn't, but you could have talked yourself into it. But when a game is that widespread and where one team shuts it down effectively in the fourth quarter, it's tough to hit an over. I finished at 57, so the under did hit there. And I think it's just a good overall discussion of if you have concerns about competitiveness, you need to at least have a red flag in your head about betting it over for that kind of game.
Yeah, for sure. From watching that game, I thought Bryce Young looked like he had tremendous pocket presence, which is obviously good in the long run for Alabama. You kind of have the situation where a lot of the top programs are bringing in new quarterbacks, and we'll talk about some of that in a little bit. And the question is, whether we're going to see the explosive offenses that we've seen over the last couple of years with the top teams. Alabama checked the box week 1, and I thought with his pocket presence, he was very good.
Yeah, he looked great, and but really impressive, and not a bad defense either. He just looked really good. Ben was on LSU at 2.5 minus UCLA. There was movement toward UCLA as kickoff approached, and I think it was probably because something Ben mentioned. The LSU being displaced during the week, having a relatively tough opponent. It closed at LSU minus 1.5. UCLA obviously won this game outright. It was 24-20 entering the fourth quarter. So still competitive there, but UCLA stretched the lead to win 38-27. Did you get a chance to catch any of that game, Ed, to see, whether LSU showed enough hope to inspire confidence going forward or anything?
Yeah, I caught a little bit of it. I think the more concerning thing was UCLA had a pretty tremendous success rate with what I still think is a questionable quarterback against a defense that was supposed to be awesome, or at least has the talent to be awesome. A defense that was terrible last year. Coach O made the changes. So, I don't know. I don't know what to think about LSU.
Yeah,
I think it's there. You had some good reason to be optimistic heading into this game. And I don't know. I don't think I've ever really believed in Coach O. And nothing in that game supported. Well, no, I guess the offense was fine. I thought Max Johnson.
And the Coach O thing is revisionist. You said this last year, the year after they won the championship. That was something you had discussed about Coach O at that point. I think the tough part is how much do the less strange circumstances affect things for LSU? Once they get to more normalcy, can they rebound then? Or was this a sign of things to come?
Well, is there going to be normalcy?
True. No, you're very right.
So there's a question there. So absolutely. I actually bet LSU minus 2.5. The main reason was the correction that my model made with UCLA based on the Hawaii game. They look good on the scoreboard, but they actually had an awful success rate against Hawaii. They were able to correct that against the LSU. So the model will correct again, and we'll see how it does going forward.
One that Ben did well with was that Georgia-Clemson game. He was on Georgia plus 3.5 versus Clemson and got good movement there because before the game, it became clear that Georgia was not going to be as shorthanded as they were expected to. And that's one thing that Ben mentioned on Wednesday or Thursday was like, hey, they got some injuries. I still like it at 3.5, but noting that. And suddenly Georgia's got some of their guys available. It did close at 2.5, moved across 3 there. But Ben didn't need the points as Georgia won outright. The defense, awesome, made DJ Uiagalelei look, not like quite of a phenom. They won 10-3 to get Ben the win there. But I think that was kind of an Ed game. Low scoring, defensive forward, but a fun game despite the fact there weren't a lot of points.
Yeah, I felt like Clemson's offense ran out of ideas. They were under immense pressure from Georgia and continue to drop back and try to throw the ball. Didn't mix it up. And so, DJ didn't get the job done, but I don't know. I don't know. It didn't seem like they changed much in the second half when Georgia was clearly getting guys to the quarterback. So we'll see. And I think, it was a low scoring game. It's not like Georgia's offense was very good in this game. And I think that's an interesting, how does that project forward into the future, right? We know that offenses have been really dominating in college football over the last couple of years. Offenses are dominating in the NFL. So when you're looking kind of forward to who can contend for conference and national titles, I don't know if Georgia really kind of scares you right now in terms of what they showed on offense. Clearly a good defense with Clemson. But those are the kind of things I'm looking at as I try to project forward this season.
So obviously the actual championship odds for Georgia do change because they got a win in a game that was in which they were an underdog. And that's probably one of the few they have this year. But did your view of them change? Or is it what you said where you're still not sold on the upside due to the offense? Obviously, again, the odds change, but did your view of them change?
I would probably downgrade them a little bit on offense and upgrade them a little bit on defense. Okay. So probably overall no.
Okay. Final one here was your college bet, UNC minus 5.5 against Virginia Tech, and it closed at 5.5. But UCLA couldn't get anything going on offense. They punted for their first 5 drives. The other one was the end of the first half. Sam Howell did show a little bit in the second half, and that was the reason why you liked UNC was because, Sam Howell, I think, is a person we should reasonably be excited about, but didn't really kick into the second half, and they just couldn't quite claw their way back. Virginia Tech won 17-10. Any final thoughts for you on that game?
Yeah, I think that was basically the worst possible way to open the season for me. Very disappointed. I think if you would have told me Virginia Tech scores 17 points, I would be almost sure that North Carolina covers that game. But Sam Howell struggled. He clearly looked like he was adapting to the fact that he no longer has 2 NFL caliber receivers out there. And we'll see if he gets better. My model made a downgrade on North Carolina as it should have. The market didn't really seem to adjust too much. So because they are playing Georgia State, and so it's not the level of competition that Virginia Tech is going to offer. So we'll see how North Carolina bounces back there. Everything's still ahead of them. Obviously, if they win the remainder of their ACC games, they'll win that. They should win that division. I guess unless Virginia Tech goes undefeated, which I don't see happening.
Right.
So, it was one game. Hopefully it's one game. Hopefully it was a small sample size. And I'm not completely off on North Carolina.
Well, I thought that Howell actually got a bit of an upgrade last week because there were roster cutdowns in the NFL, and Daz Newsome didn't even make the Bears. So, it's one of the things where, okay, maybe we're overreacting to the losses on offense. Obviously, Michael Carter, Javonte Williams, those are big losses. Right. They lost, other guys on offense. But I was like, okay, if Newsome, as I think a 4th-round pick, couldn't make the Bears, maybe we're overcomplicating things, and Howell's just good. First game, not encouraging, but it could just be, new personnel, trying to acclimate to the new personnel. And we did see him play better in the second half, I thought. So I wouldn't close the book on them just yet.
Yeah, he also had an awful pick to end the game too. So I don't think there's much to say good about North Carolina's offensive performance.
And we'll see what they do going forward. But again, I think that as they get more familiar with personnel, stuff like that, it may get better.
Yeah.
So that does close the book on week 1 for college football. We'll talk some week 2 with Dr. Eric Eager and, of course, preview week 1 of NFL. Again, follow Dr. Eager on Twitter at PFF_Eric. Check out the PFF Forecast podcast as well. We'll talk to him about week number 1 in just 1 second. But first, hey, sports fans, the 2021 NFL season is underway this week. FanDuel is giving new users an exclusive opportunity to bet on week 1 games. All you have to do is sign up, make a $10+ deposit, and you'll be able to bet on any NFL week 1 team at 40-1 odds. Yes, that is 40-1 odds. Then just sit back, watch, and win. Head over to FanDuel Sportsbook today and make your first deposit. Must be 21 plus and present in Colorado, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, or West Virginia. New users only. Max bonus $200 site credit. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Colorado, 1-800-522-4700. In Iowa, 100-BETS-OFF. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. For confidential help in Michigan, 1-800-270-7117. In Tennessee, call the Red Line at 1-800-889-9789. Or in West Virginia, 1-800-GAMBLER.net.
Covering the present.
Let's bring Dr. Eric Eager back into covering the spread once again to talk a little NFL and some college as well, getting set for week number 1 in the NFL. Eric, it is an exciting time to be an NFL fan, a football fan in general. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I mean, the season's already kind of started. We had 5 straight days of college football last week. That was a lot of fun. It was good to see, some great defense as unders did really well in college football. Home field advantage is certainly a thing again, it seems. So excited to see how a lot of that carries over into this weekend with the NFL.
I'm curious about that. Just while you brought it up, do you think that we will see something like that happen where unders may be more in play due to fans being back? We might see some good defense as a result of that. Are you expecting things to potentially translate to the NFL side, given there are some commonalities between the two?
Maybe unders did okay last year in college football, if I remember correctly. So maybe, but it was an interesting modeling choice. Like you have to sort of, when you model totals, you do have to sort of pick the league environment, the era that from which you sort of deviate. And, I don't think it was the right choice to say, hey, let's choose 2020 as our league environment, because as a lot of people have pointed out, road teams not only won their fair share of games last year, but they also played great offense. I think there was the stat out there that the road teams were as efficient offensively as home teams. And I just don't think that can be the case this year. There will be differential home field advantages that are different, though. Think about a place like Seattle, where historically you've had great home field advantage, but it's more of a progressive city that might not necessarily pack 80,000 into a stadium the way that, a different city would that maybe had less of a home field advantage relatively prior to this past season. So there's a lot of interest. I think the first week or two, people are going to be scrambling to sort of try to understand where the non-stationary takes us insofar as home field advantage totals. In our modeling at PFF, we've assumed a 2018 level of scoring, which if people remember, 2019 had some quarterback injuries, had Andrew Luck retiring. It was a little lower scoring than 2018. 2020 was bananas. So we decided to go with 18 because it was a little bit higher, but not quite as high as last year.
Yeah, and I'm also looking forward to seeing how the refs call things this year. Hopefully Rob Pizzola will do that analysis for all of us and post it on Twitter like he did last year. But it seemed like less offensive penalties were called last year, played a little role in the higher scoring that we saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. That certainly, the rule where if you're a defensive back, you can't come up and cut an offensive lineman who's pulling to block you. That might mean more points to the offense. Who knows? I mean, sometimes it changes within a season. I even think of that 2018 season.
Right.
The after Thanksgiving, all the totals went under because they started calling holding once more a game. And again, it's the fine line that I think you have to constantly keep abreast of.
What's the tough thing for you when you're trying to be reactive without being overreactive? We want to be data driven, but we also we really want to react to small samples because they do matter a lot. So when you're looking, like, let's say we're on Monday or Tuesday, you're looking back at week number 1, how much do you think we can actually take away in terms of home field, in terms of where totals may land, in terms of penalties? How much can we actually take away from week 1 without being overreacted to what we saw?
I think after week 1, I'm probably not going to do anything other than observe, but maybe after like week 4, I might sit back and look and see if there's any trends. You really have to be process driven though. I mean, a lot of stuff that can lead to higher scoring might just be noise. So you kind of have to look, as you said, penalty rates, things like, I mean, even if the weather is better, like that could be a good beat or a bad beat. Like if you have a week where all the games are bad weather and all the games go under, that could be a function of, something that's noisy rather than anything that's sort of a league-wide phenomenon.
So it'll be fun to get that data, look at it, and hopefully try to make the correct takeaways from that. And the other thing that's tough with week number 1 is we got players all over the place who have changed teams. We got rookies moving to starting lineups and stuff like that. And it's hard to account for all the offseason turnover, but you at PFF obviously might be better equipped to account for that than a lot of other places. So for you, when you have PFF's data at your disposal, do you find yourself being more aggressive in week 1 because you may have a bigger edge than other places do? Or do you still proceed with caution, knowing that there is still uncertainty even when we have player-based models and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, the hard part is that a tops-down model has one error and it's bounded, and that's important. The issue is, of course, that in sports betting, the difference between 52% and 53% is humongous as far as whether you win or not. A player level model can get you more precision, but at the expense of accuracy in some cases, because, when you have many different things and you're sort of building an agent-based model, one error propagates through the entire system. So you really do have to be careful. And I think it's more of an ensemble, like an ensemble, a top-down model with a bottoms-up model can really sort of help you do better. But yeah, I always find myself a little bit more aggressive with week 1, just because I think by the time you get to week 8, the die has already been cast. And like, there are teams, for example, like Pittsburgh, that, maybe the national media doesn't quite understand and the sharper people, but the betting markets are generally speaking really efficient late in the season, and it's harder to beat them then. Now, you do have so much time between, when things are released in like May and now, where while the numbers might be beaten into place, they might be beaten into place due to information that is sort of overloaded and improperly weighted, stuff like that. So I do think early in the season is probably the time. And as the season progresses, it's probably a lot harder, to sort of make money. And I think that's been most people's sort of, experience.
Dr. Eager, you really need to stop giving everyone the secrets about ensembling different types of models, because, we don't want all our secrets to get away. So, but let's move on to the first game, Thursday night game. I just looked at Jim's rundown, and I see that Tampa Bay is now an 8.5-point favorite. Clearly, the reigning Super Bowl champions, but they do have a 43-year-old quarterback. I think he's still 43, and against the Dallas team that has an explosive offense that gets their man Dak Prescott back. So, how are you viewing this game?
Yeah, I mean, this thing opened at 6.5. It sort of got to 7, stayed there for a little bit. Then you had the Hard Knocks bump for Dallas down to 6.5 again, and now you have a full, multiple point swing through a key number of 7 to 8.5. I wrote an article on PFF.com that actually was this morning on offensive line continuity. Every offensive lineman that you take out of the chain, depending on how you sort of slice it, is a quarter to a half a point in the point spread, even independent of how good the lineman is. And then Zach Martin, who will probably not play because of COVID, is a player who's worth about a third of a win per season, which if you look at sort of like aggregating that down to a game, is anywhere from half to 3/4 of a point. So that is a big move. And, I get it. I think there's a lot of uncertainty with Dallas. I also think, the defending Super Bowl champion almost always does well against the spread in the first week of the season. Also Thursday night football. Now, they get the extra week to prepare, but Thursday night football, generally speaking, favors the better team, not the home team, the better team. the better prepared team. I do think Arians has a little bit of an advantage over McCarthy, even though I think McCarthy's a little underrated. So all those things make sense as to why Tampa's 8.5. I can't lay 8.5 anymore. Like, I have some 7.5. I have them teased down to a half a point, like, or I think 1.5 when it was 7.5. Like, if that's the play, if you like Tampa, right? It's teasing through 7 and 3 down to 2.5, getting them at a field goal, and then looking at the other plays on the board, which include, Miami at 2.5, Indy at 2.5. There's a lot of teasable lines there. We're going to talk about the Bills, teasing the Bills down to roughly a pick, so on and so forth. Like those, that's the way I would play this if I'm looking at this game. The other play, and this is one where, since it's gone through a key number of 51, I do think under is probably the total that you want to go with on Thursday night if you go with one. Unders have been, unders are tough, especially when you look at, Dallas's defense. But I do think Tampa Bay, if you look at the way they play football, it's run, pass. And, that can not only be ineffective sometimes, but it can also slow the game down and lengthen the drives time-wise.
So it's 8.5 now. Has it gotten to a point where you are tempted to buy back in on Dallas, or is it just such a rough situation where you think there's enough where you're probably just going to stand pat with what you have from the Bucs perspective?
Yeah, hedging is certainly something that if that some people, can want to do. I just don't know if you're getting, through 7 is certainly a key number, depending, the total here is high, but like you're getting a decent percentage there. Our power rankings on Tampa are good enough where I don't see value in the hedged position.
So do you think that this move from 7.5 to 8.5 has to do with Martin being out, or just over exuberance of the Tampa Bay Bucs and the defending Super Bowl champs?
I think it's a lot of things. I think it's Martin. It's I think every single COVID sort of situation is going to give rise to oh my God, this team is fragile. Let's buy the other team that's not. Okay. And Tampa's 100% vaccinated. Football, except for quarterback, is a weak link game. So the more sort of like uncertainty you shove into the system, I think the more that it hurts teams that, on the weak links. Dallas is already a team of weak links, right? Like on defense, they're expecting the secondary to get better from last year. They're expecting the D-line to be better against the run. Like, they're a bad defense last year, and they might have gotten a little bit better, but defense, you shake one or two things up. If we get an unforeseen COVID situation for either of these teams, it's going to affect Dallas, I think, a lot more than it affects Tampa.
The surprising thing about the Dallas breakout too is I think they are around 95%. So, that's why that's one of we can't say definitively Zach Martin is out, because it sounds like he was a vaccinated player. He could have 2 negative tests. It seems like he's probably not going to play, but there is still that door open. But it's good to know, have like a general guideline in your head of which teams may be better equipped to handle a breakout than others. And one team that may not be is the Bills. Let's move now to the Steelers at the Bills. Right now, Bills 6.5 point favorites. Total here is 48.5. And I want to talk to you about Josh Allen, because weird dude, given the way his career trajectory has gone all the way up last year, became an MVP contender, but we can always see regression happen. Do you see anything in the underlying data on Josh Allen that says regression may be here, or do you expect Josh Allen from 2020 to be the forward-looking version of Josh Allen as well?
I think it'd be a little bit foolish to say Josh Allen is going to be like 2020 is the baseline for him, although that's kind of how he's being paid. But at the same time, I do think he's reset the normal for him. I don't know if you can immediately just go straight to regression with him because of, the how well he played and some of the fundamental things. Like, for example, he was one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL last year in PFF grade when the opposition showed a different coverage than they played pre-snap. So, like, he's clearly getting it, right? And there's obviously the floor that he has by running that was always there, especially in 2019 where he couldn't, throw the ball into the ocean at times. He didn't turn the ball over, and he was a very good runner, so that like buoyed them a little bit. So I don't know if he'll put up the bananas like numbers that he did a season ago. And I do wonder, like, our numbers like Buffalo here. I have bet Buffalo at 6, I think 6.5 even. It's been so long since the numbers were since I bet those numbers, but like, it is interesting, right? Because the Steelers were only 2.5 point underdogs when they went to Buffalo in December, and has the narrative shifted that like 4 full points after an offseason on these two teams? I think that's the argument you have to make if you want the Steelers side here.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think with Buffalo, Brian Daboll's making life easy for Josh Allen to call in a lot of play action, call in a lot of passing on early downs, and numerous other things. What do you think about the other side of the ball? Is Pittsburgh going to get it together on offense enough, or maybe the drop, the struggles? Well, I think their struggles were always there last year, but they really showed up in the latter part of the season. Is the drop in market expectancy because of the Pittsburgh offense?
I think so, but I think the narrative out of Pittsburgh is that like somebody like Matt Canada is going to come in and they're going to run more motion, they're going to run more play action. Pittsburgh was, like, I call these things KPIs. Their offensive KPIs were terrible last year. They ran play action less than 20% of the time. They only were above league average in play action in 3 games all season. They didn't run a lot of motion. They weren't doing a lot of things that make it easier for an offense to have success. It sounds like Matt Canada wants to do that. Now, the question is, do they have the goods, right? They lost David DeCastro in the offseason. Their offensive line is already banged up. They drafted a running back in the first round, which means there's going to be more touches allocated to him to sort of make the draft pick look better or to try to justify that position. And so I'm just a little bit afraid at times that, things are going to sort of like we're going to get the same Steelers offensive efficiency, but it's going to be because all the components have gotten worse while the scheme has probably gotten a little bit better.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think that what they've done showed so far in the preseason does say that the KPIs we're talking about should get better, but losing Villanueva, losing DeCastro, that might offset that. Let's move now to the Packers and the Saints. Packers 4-point favorites. Total here is 50. Before we talk about the venue for this game, let's talk about the Saints offense, because you've been a vocal proponent of letting Jameis cook on Twitter the past couple of years. Jameis Winston won the starting job here. The pass catching core pretty thin though. After Marquez Callaway, obviously Michael Thomas not going to play here. So let's talk about this offense in general before we talk about this game. What are your expectations for the Jameis-led Saints this year?
I'm probably under them on market. Like, their win total's 9. I feel like it's a very similar situation as the Patriots last year, where you lose a Hall of Fame, you lose a Hall of Fame quarterback, but you keep the Hall of Fame coach, and the defense is still pretty good, right? I think the Saints defense is still pretty good. They have depth issues, although they went out and got Bradley Roby today in a trade. So maybe they're trying a little bit on that. But they still got a good defense. They got a great offensive line in my estimation, and they have a great coach. And so it's really hard to suck if that's like the case. It's hard to win a Super Bowl. Like, I don't think I'd ever place a futures bet on this team, but it is hard. Like, I have bet under on them, but I'm a little nervous now after seeing Jameis play in the preseason again. Marquez Callaway is certainly the guy there. No Michael Thomas, no Emmanuel Sanders, no Jared Cook. So they are going to me, it's going to be kind of a ground and pound game for them. And you look at the other side of the ball in this game. The Packers are going to be without Bakhtiari. They're already without Lindsey, which was a move they made. So they're putting Eldon Jenkins at left tackle, who's a great interior player. But I think when you look at this game, 50 for a total is pretty high if you consider both teams are playing in an unfamiliar place. Both, the Packers offense is going to be a little bit, I think, compromised by offensive line issues. And the Saints are going to be, I think, a run-first team that takes shots. And Jameis is I think a good shot taker, but it's going to be a little bit perturbed for a while until Thomas comes back.
So what about the location of this game? New Orleans is not a place you can play a football game right now. It's in Jacksonville. Does that move the needle for you at all?
Well, sure, certainly. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why you could see value on the Saints, right? So this game opened, Saints were 2.5-point favorites. While the Rodgers situation was being resolved, I think the books were very much splitting the difference. If you did a market implied model, power rankings, the Packers were like 1 point above average, which seems to me like not the right answer if Jordan Love's the quarterback, and not the right answer if Rodgers is the quarterback. Now they're, in the marketplace about 3 points above average, 3.5. And this game, moved out to Packers minus 2.5, which isn't that big of a move from Packers plus 2.5. But then you go to Jacksonville, and now it's 4.5, and you've traveled through that key number of 3, which in a game that has a total of like 50 is like 7% or so. So to me, like you take that percentage and you take the Saints with it. I mean, you're just making a value play there. I know, I think some of this relocation issue is certainly valid, but for one particular game, I think it's overblown. So I would take the Saints plus the points in this one, just because the numbers that the market went through as you sort of took away the 2.5 point home field advantage that you give every single team was a key number of 3.
Yeah, and it was a lot of movement here. Bummer for those of us who were in on Packers plus 2.5, but whatever. We live and we move on. Got plenty of other games on the board for this week. Any other standing out to you, Eric, as being good betting value for week number 1?
Well, this is where the market sort of disagrees with me, and I'd be interested to see how it turns out. But, a lot of money's coming in on Carolina. Like, they opened, I think, 3.5, 4. It's now 5.5 now. Not a lot of key numbers you're going through there. But I like the Jets. I like taking the points of the Jets. I know they have the most rookies starting in the NFL. I know they have a new coach. But I think they're better at quarterback. I think they're better at head coach. Joe Brady's a good offensive play caller, but they're starting Cameron Irving and Pat Elflein on the left side of their line. So I'll take the points of the Jets here. I think that the circumstances for Zach Wilson are going to be a lot easier than the circumstances for Sam Darnold were in the Jets. And so everybody's sort of like being like, oh, it's just another Jets team. I don't think so. I think Mike LaFleur is a good offensive mind. And I think Robert Saleh is a head coach that we're all going to be looking back on and saying, oh, that was a slam dunk hire for the Jets.
I think the frustrating thing with it's the Jets angle is that it's a different, like, a lot of the sentiment there stems from the Mike Maccagnan era too, and that's gone. We've seen Joe Douglas finally get to put his footprint on this team, and obviously trading up for a guard, you can definitely have some reservations about, but they kind of took like the approach we've seen successful teams take, where they just say, okay, we're going to get a quarterback and then build around him, getting Elijah Moore, bringing in Corey Davis and stuff like that. And I think that does allow us to have optimism about them in general. And it does kind of nullify the LOL Jets type of mindset, because it's a different team from literally the top all the way down.
Absolutely. Yes. And Douglas has been making, they haven't had a lot to work with over the last few years, but I think he's done a good job with what they've had to work with. Mekhi Becton was a good draft pick last year. I don't like trading up for Elijah Vera Tucker, but now that he's here, he's a good football player. Wilson too, like, there were questions as to whether you take Fields or him. I actually think Wilson was a fine pick at 2. Corey Davis looks great. They do need to round out that roster, but they're not facing Tampa week 1. They're facing the Carolina Panthers. And as much as I am skeptical about every team this time of year, very skeptical about Carolina.
So, Eric, we had a great opening weekend, or at least week 1. I guess you could call it the second weekend of college football. Saw a lot of great games. You guys have a ton of awesome data over at PFF. Any college football games that you're looking at this weekend in week 2?
Yeah, I'm late to this. Not late. A lot of us got ahead of this when it happened, but I actually am a holder of a decent amount of Iowa Hawkeyes futures for the Big Ten and Big Ten West, I believe, as well. They're catching 4.5 against Iowa State. I think that's too much. I think Iowa, certainly not better at the quarterback position. I think Brock Purdy is a little bit overrated. Defense is extremely good, and they're extremely well coached. So I will take Iowa getting 4.5. I know you could have gotten as much as 7 at some point last week. So again, a little bit late to the party here. But I do like them. Another bet that I like when I'm looking at this, again, this is a little bit late to the party, but I like NC State this week as well. I think they're now laying almost a full field goal, but I like that one as well.
Yeah, it is 2.5 for NC State versus Mississippi State. But I think that one does make sense. The Iowa State game, probably going to be pretty fun. Always an enjoyable watch if you enjoy the Big Ten brand of football, but it should be extra fun for this week as well. That is Dr. Eric Eager. Check him out on Twitter at PFF_Eric, and make sure you check out the PFF Forecast podcast. Link to that and the Apple Podcast page is in the show notes up on numberFire.com. Eric, we appreciate the time as always. Good luck to you in week 1 of NFL and week 2 of college, and hopefully we'll talk to you here once again soon.
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's fun.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Covering the future.
Big thank you one more time to Dr. Eric Eager for swinging by and breaking down his thoughts on NFL Week 1 and college football Week 2. And Ed, I thought that getting data on what books thought about the home field for this year was interesting with that Saints-Packers game, because it was 2.5, moved to 4. It sounds like they're at about 1.5 points for a neutral field. So I think that's kind of interesting. Where do you sit right now in home field entering what is a very different year this year than last year?
So in the NFL, home field has been decreasing. I usually look at a 5-year average. I actually took out last year's data just because of the empty stadiums, and I get a home field of 1.84 points. So before you asked me about that, I thought I was still at 2, but I think that's what I used in 2019. So it's still lower than that. It kind of depends on how you do it, because home field advantage was actually negative in 2019 when they were full crowds. So I'm using 1.8. I think that's close enough to the 1.5. I kind of wouldn't be surprised if 4 moved to 4.5 with the Packers there. I do think Green Bay is a legit Super Bowl contender. And I think New Orleans is going to be figuring out things, and now they have to do it at a neutral site in Jacksonville.
Right. Yeah, I had 1.5 initially as mine. I still have 1.5. I was very nervous about that because I found myself on a lot of away teams for week number 1. I do want to evaluate based on what happens in this first week of games. And it's not because of the 1.5. Like, there are pretty significant margins pushing me there. So it's not just home field that may get me there, but I do want to see where things go, how it turns out, and see if I do need to reevaluate that heading forward. But again, as Dr. Eager said, we should always be wary of not overreacting. Let's move now into covering the future for this week. And Ed, you want to talk about a game I'm excited to watch because I think it'll be a fun one with two pretty potentially exciting teams. That's the Chargers at Washington. What's your read on this game right now with the Chargers 1-point favorites?
Yeah, I mean, my numbers actually like a lot of bad teams as home dogs. And when you look through that list, the least bad team, I believe, is the Washington football team. So they brought in Ryan Fitzpatrick as the quarterback. That's clearly a better situation than what they started out with last year with Dwayne Haskins going into the season. And then their defense took a dramatic turn last year with talented defensive line, and they were much better on the defensive side of the ball. You kind of don't expect them to necessarily sustain that level, but I do like that they signed William Jackson as a cornerback, guy who's going to be able to lock down number 1 receivers for Washington. And then on the other side, the Los Angeles Chargers had a great year last year. Justin Herbert had a great year last year, but you really expect regression for a quarterback that was so good in his rookie year. Aaron Schatz has talked about this on Football Outsider. It's definitely one of his preseason hits for 2021. The Chargers actually weren't particularly good when I look at adjusted success rate last year. They were very near league average. So I expect both these teams to be near NFL average. My model actually has Washington winning this game outright by a point. Very close game, something that could definitely come down to the last seconds of the game. But right now you can get the football team +1 at home, and I like that.
Yeah, I think that it's a very interesting game because I have been, I think, lower than market on Washington this entire offseason. I heard a lot of buzz around their division odds, partly because people just don't like the Cowboys as much as I do, which again is going to be fun going into week number 1. And I was hesitant to buy in, but I do think that 1 is fair. That's right where I have it as well. So I think that's
you have football team by 1.
No, I have Chargers by 1.19. Okay. So I think it's a fair number at Chargers by 1. But that's despite the fact that I've been lower than consensus on Washington all year. So if you've been more in line with them, it makes sense that you would have football team by 1 in this situation.
Yeah, that's what the numbers say, and it feels right too. I don't feel like I feel like the Chargers are overrated. And
I also don't know why I call them football team. I hate that name. It's stupid. Washington is just easier. I should just call them Washington. I need your take on this because I've seen a lot of Twitter stuff. Again, Twitter is the worst. But anyway, Twitter stuff about people saying they should keep the Washington football team.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. I think it's the stupidest name of all time. I know you're more of a soccer person, though. So pro or con for you, or pro or against Washington football team keeping that name?
I kind of like it. I like WFT. I think it's a good, little acronym. I don't know what my soccer fandom has to do with any of that, but
it's more like, FC stuff like that. Like that's more like a soccer thing than a football thing. So I'm just not used to it and it drives me nuts. I think they had like the Washington Armada. That sounds kind of cool. I can get behind that. Any name that doesn't end in an A or an S, I am in favor of. Like the Jazz, that's a cool name. I think the Armada, the Heat, those are cool names. So I'm pro Armada this week.
I kind of like Washington football team. I would stick with that.
I think it's terrible.
Plus, you got a name already. You have a name. You have a year of brand recognition. You have a year of fair weather fans that jumped. I got a friend that decided he was a long-suffering Washington football team fan. So I think that's all hilarious. So I would like them to keep the name.
Team Armada over here. My cover in the future for this week is looking towards an under because I do think that, similar to Dr. Eager, he was on a couple unders when we talked to him. I think leaning towards unders this week is the right move because fans are back in the stands. I do think that played a partial role in last year's big totals, and it wasn't all of it because, like you said, penalties mattered a lot, but it was likely some. To me, the game where I'm most inclined to bet under is the Eagles versus the Falcons at 48.5. Neither of these defenses are ones I'm super high on, but I also think they might be a bit underrated. If you look back at last year, overall, the Falcons finished 15th in schedule-adjusted defense based on numberFire's metrics. The Eagles were 19th. I've got them projected to finish 18th and 19th respectively this year, so they're both bottom-half defenses, but I'd bet I'm probably higher on them than consensus. I'd also expect this game to feature a lot of running clock because the Eagles are starting Jalen Hurts to open the year, and in the 4 games Hurts started last year, the Eagles passed just 51% of the time on early downs in the first half. Their 51% rate there would have been the 9th lowest mark in the league if it were their full season mark. When Carson Wentz started, it was 55% or 56%. So it was a different coaching staff then, but I think it's fair to expect the Eagles to skew pretty strongly towards the run this year. Atlanta finished 8th in early down first half pass rate. Now they're adding Arthur Smith as their play caller. Smith was run heavy in Tennessee. That was likely dictated by their personnel, and their personnel here favors the pass. I wouldn't want to be a run-heavy team with Mike Davis, Cordero Patterson, and Wayne Gallman, so I'm not expecting them to be the play-calling system that Smith was in Tennessee, but they also might not be as pass-heavy as they were last year. So those are 2 things that push me towards the under. I think the defenses are better than perception, and I think that both teams may run more than perception, and both those components lend themselves toward the under. So I'll take under 48.5 at minus 115 here for the Eagles versus the Falcons. And we talked about this with Rob Pizzola before. Betting unders is not great for your health because it is far more stressful than betting an over. But I do feel like in this spot, I'm okay with it. Any thoughts for you on the Eagles or Falcons entering 2021?
I'm not sure what I don't know. Atlanta should be a below average football team. Their defense has never been good over the last however many years. Actually, I think they were okay for parts of last year. Matt Ryan's getting a little old, although I'm interested to see how his partnership with Kyle Pitts, the rookie, will be. And, I think when you're starting Jalen Hurts at quarterback, I don't have a lot of hope for Philly at this point. I think they're going to be definitely bottom 10 team in the NFL, and my numbers reflect that.
Yeah, mine do as well. And it's not all Hurts. A lot of it is the team telling us they don't care about 2021. Like when they're trading for future assets and stockpiling those, it says to me they are not a 2021 focused team. And some of their draft things did too. Like Landon Dickerson, good player, not a guy you count on for 2021 given his injury. So I think a lot of their moves said they're gearing towards 2022 and beyond. That does worry me here. So I think that being low on their offense in general is good, and that does translate to an under here at 48.5. That is all that we have here for week number 1 in the NFL. It is good to have some actual games to break down once again. Big thank you once again to Dr. Eric Eager of Pro Football Focus. Check out the PFF Forecast podcast with him and George Charuri and see their thoughts on week 1 over there as well. Ed, what is going on for you this week over at the Power Rank?
On the Football Analytics show, I had Dr. Ben Baldwin on the show. It was a great conversation. It's up right now, and he does so much good work on his site, rbsdm.com. You can actually figure out how you can remember those 5 letters much more easily, because I could never remember them. And then,
is it running backs don't matter?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Sorry.
What?
Did I spoil it?
Thanks, Jim. Which is a true statement. So that was a great conversation. And then, members of my site get access to all of my best predictions, things that I feel very good about. There's a lot of, most of the value in the NFL is bad teams at home that are underdogs, which I think is pretty interesting. So you can definitely check that out at thepowerrank.net. That's where you can learn more about becoming a member of my site. And there's no better time than right now.
Does bad teams at home count the New York Giants against Denver in week 1?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Okay, good. Because after our little conference out in Denver, where people are very mad at me for talking down on the Broncos, a little nervous about under 8.5. I feel like I've got a lot riding on this one now reputationally. So wouldn't mind if they were to take a loss this week to help out that under win total there. I'm on Twitter at Jim Sonnes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. We have our daily fantasy preview for week 1 going up tomorrow. We're recording that at 10 a.m. on the FanDuel YouTube page, up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed after that. We'll also have a YouTube show previewing Monday Night Football and Thursday Night Football every week, 4 p.m. I'll have this Thursday's preview, Ryan Williams, previewing Monday Night Football next week. So make sure to check that out on the FanDuel YouTube page, and also subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, and subscribe to this podcast, Covering the Spread, while you are at it. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in for this week. We made it. Week number 1 is here. Got some football coming up. Sit back, enjoy, go win some bets, and we'll talk to you once again next week. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.
What's up, guys? This is Jordan Spieth. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube channel.